Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Hutton, and I'm the author of the book War Animals, the Unsung Heroes of World War II. Today, I'm going to give you a little PowerPoint presentation and an overview of the book so you can see what incredible heroes these four-legged and winged animals were during World War II. And I know that you are going to love learning about these pieces of history almost as much as I enjoy telling them about them. So let's get started. I have a short PowerPoint presentation, and then at the end, I'll have some links where you can buy my book, and you can also email me if you have any other questions or want to learn more about these wonderful heroes. So let's get started. So these are the covers of both of my books. Sergeant Reckless was my very first book that I wrote. And it's a wonderful story about a war horse from the Korean War who was one of America's greatest heroes. And you can read all about her as well. But it was when I was researching a medal for Sergeant Reckless, the PDSA Dicken Medal, which is the greatest award an animal can receive for gallantry and bravery in an action. And it's given over in England. It's known as the Victoria Cross for animals. And in 2016, I nominated Reckless for this award, and gratefully, it was bestowed upon her. And I went over to England to get it for her. In doing this research on this medal, I discovered all of these incredible animals that received the medal starting in World War II. And my publisher, when I told him about this medal and was trying to do some publicity for Reckless receiving this prestigious award, he said, "Man, there are a lot of great stories about animals that have served during World War II. What do you think about writing a book on them?" And I said, "Well, I would do that in a heartbeat." And so that is how War Animals, the Unsung Heroes of World War II began. And I had to give it an American angle, of course. And so we have the war dogs, the war birds, there were some war horses, and even a war cat that you will learn about. And the stories are just phenomenal and very exciting as well to learn about these moments of history. So when World War II began, we did not have a war dog program in place. It was the first time dogs were used in the military for America. Great Britain used them in World War I. Germans did as well, but America did not have a war dog program. And so when Pearl Harbor happened in December of 1941, this woman right here, Arlene Erlanger, she was a very famous poodle breeder. And that's Greer Garson with her in the picture up here on the left. And those are Greer Garson's two poodles that she got from Arlene Erlanger. And Arlene felt that the dogs needed to get into this war, to guard our bases, to guard our airports, military functions. They could do so many different things. So Arlene got together with her dog enthusiast friends from the Westminster Dog Show and the American Kennel Club, and they formed an organization known as Dogs for Defense. So Dogs for Defense put out a national cry to the American people to donate their personal dogs or personal pets to the war dog effort. And these dogs would have been trained by the Army and also the Marine Corps to protect our coastlines, to protect our airports, to protect our munitions plants, any place that was a threat that could be bombed, like Pearl Harbor was, from the enemy. And so the American people donated 40,000 dogs were donated at first. Now, I don't know about you guys, but my Australian Shepherd, Misty, yeah, she's not going to war. You touch her to go to war, we're skipping World War II, we're going right to World War III. But this was an amazing patriotic time. And as I said, 40,000 dogs were donated. Now, some of them were too old, some of them were not well, some of them were not the right breed. And so that first number was whittled down to 20,000. and 20,000 made the first cut. And then from there, they went on to training and to see who could really pass and do the job. And 10,425 dogs ultimately served our country during World War II, and an additional 1,100 plus served with the Marine Corps over in the Pacific and other places as well. So it was an amazing, amazing effort. And that was the start of our War Dog program. This cute picture down here, this War Dog Fund, that was actually started by Dogs for Defense. And for $1, you could enlist your pet. It didn't matter if it was a dog, a cat, a turtle, a bird, and he or she could be a private in any branch of the military you chose. The pay grades went up, and if you donated $100, the animal could be an admiral or a commandant in the Marine Corps or a general or whatever you'd like. But they raised an amazing amount of money for the War Dog effort and to get these dogs through the initial processes and then on to the Army for training. So the dogs had to go through an inspection to make sure that they were healthy. As you can see, this top left picture, the dogs were going through being weighed and inspected by veterinarians to see how healthy they were. They had to be put through their paces and be trained. You can see in this picture on the upper right, they were working with the handlers taught to sit, come, whatever training was needed on top of whatever training the dogs might have had at their family's home. But they were initially sent to Front Royal, Virginia, and that's the picture down in the bottom left-hand corner. And then the dogs were trained to be scout dogs, sentry dogs, patrol dogs. They were taught to attack people if they felt that they were doing something nefarious. They had to get used to the sounds of battle, sounds of gunfire. They had to get used to the smoke. It was an amazing training process that these animals had to go through. And in doing so, the handlers also had to be trained because there were no dog handlers. And so the dog handlers had to be trained as well. But the dogs originally went to Front Royal, Virginia, where they went through this training. And ultimately, as the years went on, other places with the Army were also opened up for training. The Marine Corps also had their own training, and most of these dogs were the Doberman Pinschers that were donated by the Doberman Pinscher Club of America. And these dogs went over and served in the Pacific, mostly is where the Marines were. And they went through an amazing training with them as well. What I love about the Marine Corps dogs, and as you can see in this bottom left-hand picture here, this is a picture of Dean, and this is Dean's War Dog book. And the Marines had a War Dog book for every dog that served with them. And it was an amazing experience for me to go to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, and go through. They have over 13 boxes of these War Dog books. And to hold these pieces, these moments of history in your hand and read about the incredible things these dogs went through and their handlers went through during the World War II. It's all written out in these books. It talks about whether they got shots or they were sick or if they got wounded or whether they were transferred. Amazing pieces of history. When I first got these books in my hand, I am boo-hooing like a baby at the National Archives because I just couldn't believe I'm reading these moments of history about these dogs. And they became so real to me, and I felt it was my duty to be able to tell their stories as best as I can in my book. And it was just an incredible experience. The dog here in the middle turns out that is Jack. And you'll hear about Jack in a little bit with his 1st Marine War Dog platoon. And Jack was a messenger dog who was originally trained at the Army. He went through the first training at the Army. And then the Marine Corps picked him up and then put him through training with his dogs. And he was actually part of the 1st Marine War Dog platoon, as was Andy here on the top right side. Andy was also an amazing patrol dog. You'll hear a little bit about him as well. But as I said, these dogs had to get used to gun smoke and the sounds of battle. And here they're going through some of the smoke training. They also had to be trained to get off of the ships. You know, they're going from one big ship down to the Higgins boats. And so that had to be taught to them. And the men had to get used to taking care of these animals on these ships as well. So it was just truly an incredible effort to include the dogs into the whole program, not just the men, but also the dogs. So these dogs, most of the dogs that were trained actually stayed home and guarded our home front. They guarded our coastlines. And there's an incredible story in the book about Operation Pastorius, which talks about how 8 Germans penetrated our coastlines, 4 up in New York and 4 down in Florida. And their mission was to wreak havoc in America for the next year. They had over $150,000 of cash back then on them. They had bombs, material to make bombs and just explosives. And it was just amazing. But thankfully, a Coast Guardsman stumbled upon the first men landing in New York and was able to foil them. And they ultimately were all captured. But it was the greatest manhunt for the FBI at that time. And you can read all about it in the book. It's an incredible story. But these dogs would guard the coastlines there on the east and the west coast. And you can see here they're guarding also other, not only the coastline, but different airports and munitions plants. And wherever they felt needed to have extra security, the dogs would stand ready to guard at all costs. In my book, I also talk about the British dogs on the war front, and these dogs were absolutely amazing. And all of these dogs received the Dicken Medal, and you'll read all about them in the story. I'll just give you a brief highlight of them here, but this is on the top left here is Judy. Now, Judy stole my heart, and I think Judy actually is the heart and soul of the book in many ways. When I finished writing her story, her chapter, I cried for 3 days because this dog was so noble, and she was the only prisoner of war dog that received, that we know of as far as being an actual recipient of the Dicken Medal. But she survived 3.5 years in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and that's with her handler here, Frank Williams, who found her there, and he took her under his wing, got her an official prisoner of war number, and they were in Madang, the war in the Pacific. And it's just an amazing story of survival. The men credit Judy for saving their lives because the mantra was, if Judy can make it, so can I. And she would bring food to them. She would forage for food at night, bring them snakes and rats and dead chickens, whatever she could, to try to help her men. And they took care of her at all costs because she was such a valuable part of their unit. The middle dog here is Sheila. She's the only civilian dog to receive the Dicken Medal. And I mean that because her handler there, that's Frank Dagg, that's her owner. And a plane crashed up in the Cheviot Hills in between England and Scotland. And it was John Dagg heard the crash, and Sheila went up the hill to see what was going on. And they rescued 4 Americans from this flight. And helped them down the hill. And as soon as they got down the hill, the plane exploded. And so thankfully, Sheila and John were able to save these 4. It turns out another 4 were also rescued, but they went down the hill on their own. They felt everybody else in the plane did pass away. And sadly, 2 men did not make it from that plane crash. But Sheila, it was just an amazing rescue that this dog did in the wintertime, and you'll read all about her. It's truly a special story. The dog on the right here is Antis. Antis flew with her owner, Robert Bozdak, in the Czechoslovakian Air Squadron for the British. And man, Antis had a knack for being able to hear the planes coming in during the Blitz, especially. He could hear the planes coming in before the men ever knew what was going on, and she gave her tell as to what was happening, and they were able to get prepared. And then also when she would fly in the plane, even though she was not supposed to be there, but he was considered a good luck charm, because as long as he was on board flight, nothing really seriously happened to the plane or to the men on board. They were always ready to come home, even though he was severely injured in one flight mission when several bullets strafed the aircraft and came up from the bottom, and he was hit in the face and in the ear, but he survived, bless his heart. The bottom here is Queen Elizabeth, Princess Elizabeth, and that's with Peter. Peter was one of the digging dogs. He could go into the rubble and find people or animals that were trapped, or he would help find the bodies of people that did not make it in the bombings of London and Great Britain at that time, as well as Rip down here. He was one of the very first of the digging dogs, as they're called in the book. And you can just look at the devastation of London. They were going through this Blitz, and it was absolutely incredible what they went through. And so you can just imagine this little dog having to start to dig through that rubble, as well as the men that were digging through this rubble, to find any kind of survivors, whether it be two-leggeds or four-leggeds or any kind of animal that might have survived. And then there are the American dogs on the war front. And as I said, this is a picture here of some of the guys in the 1st Marine War Dog Platoon that I'll talk about in a moment. They actually made the very first landing on Bougainville in the Solomon Islands in December of 1943. And this is Caesar right here. And this is Jack, and that is Andy. And so you get a feeling of how these dogs were all part of this wonderful platoon. You can see how dense the jungles were there in that middle picture. And this is why they needed messenger dogs, because they couldn't get reception on the walkie-talkies. They couldn't string communication wire for the walkie-talkies. And so the dogs were used as messengers, scout dogs, patrol dogs, throughout these times to try to help sniff out the enemy. It was really, truly amazing. And then here's a picture on the bottom right. You can see, remember that the training picture I showed you a few slides back. This is what the dogs had to do in coming down from the ship. You can see them being dropped onto the Higgins boats here. And that's what they were being trained to do in that other slide. And these two dogs on the bottom left and center were on Iwo Jima. And this picture on the bottom left really touched my heart, because you can see these dogs stood guard so their handlers could get a few moments of rest. And once things started to happen, of course, then the dogs went on full alert and patrol. And it was just incredible what they were able to do. So we did have one extremely well-known hero in World War II, and that was Chips. Chips actually is the highest decorated dog in American history, even today. Chips is the only dog to actually receive the Silver Star. And he was also nominated for a Purple Heart. But sadly, when his story got out and was told that he did receive the Silver Star, there was a huge cry from the president of the Military Order of World Wars and the Military Order of the Purple Heart to take away his medals because he was a dog. And sadly, that's what happened. So even though he was so heroic in what he did, it was amazing what he did, and you can learn all about it in the book. And I'm actually going to do a PowerPoint on his story as well, so you can learn his story in detail. But when they hit the beaches of Sicily, he broke free of his handler when they hit the beach because they were being attacked. He stormed the machine gun nest and ripped it off its tripod, got the gunner by the neck, and dragged the gunner out. And 3 other Italian soldiers put their arms up in surrender because they were more afraid of this crazy war dog than they were being a prisoner of war. But Chip survived. He got wounded twice. He was hit with bullets, scraped his head and his back, and so he was wounded. But what he did that day saved his platoon and allowed them to move farther into Licata on the beach of Sicily, and farther than any other unit had gotten through that day, just because of Chips. But he would guard the prisoners, German prisoners of war. And a funny story that you will learn about in the book, which I absolutely love, is when he received the Silver Star, General Eisenhower was in Italy and went over to congratulate him on his amazing bravery and success. And when he bent down to pet Chips, Chips nipped him in the hand. And all was forgiven because that was a no-no. Chips was only doing what he was taught, and General Eisenhower knew that. But go to the Eisenhower Presidential Library, and you will find an incredible educational plan for children, all surrounding Chips and what he did in the war and biting General Eisenhower's hand. And it is absolutely precious and really educational, and a great way to teach kids about the World War II battles by using these animals. And it was really just something special. But he survived the war, and on his way home here, you can see him at the train station. That's John Wren, little Johnny Wren, on the right-hand side, meeting his war dog at the train station. And he came home to a hero's welcome. There were photographers, their press was all over this story. He came home in December of 1945, and he was just this wonderful little war hero that people could give the good news about. So when I discovered Chip's story, and of course, working with the PDSA with Sergeant Reckless, and they had opened up their archives to me to give me all of the information on all of the animals that had received the Dicken Medal throughout history, which was an amazing thing for them to do. And I'm very, very grateful for the PDSA for doing that for me. But so in doing this, I nominated Chips for the PDSA Dicken Medal. And in January of 2018, on the 75th anniversary of when Chips actually guarded Churchill and President Roosevelt in a 10-day conference called the Casablanca Conference in 1943. And it was a very important conference. Even General Charles de Gaulle was there, and other heads of state. And they decided at that conference that they were going to take nothing less than total surrender from the enemy. But anyway, so little Johnny Wren, you can see on the picture on the left, is there when his war dog comes home. Well, Big John Wren goes to England in January of 2018, and receives the Dicken Medal for his war dog Chips. And it was just a glorious day of celebration and honor. And you can Google Chips, and you will find a lot of articles that were on that ceremony. And it was just terrific. And then on November 14th, 2019, Chips also received one of our very first Medal of Bravery, Animals in War and Peace Medal of Braveries. And you can read all of that on the website as well. So the 1st Marine War Dog Platoon is the very first platoon that the Marine Corps had sent out. And the 1st Marine War Dog really showed how powerful the war dogs were. And as I said, there's a picture here of Caesar, who was a messenger dog, and I'll talk about him in a moment. And these are just some of the guys. These were the messenger dogs. This is Thor, this is Caesar, and this is Jack. And Jack can always be seen with his half of his ear bitten off because he lost that in a dog fight. But these are some wonderful pictures. You can see them down here going through the jungles of Bougainville, and that's Jack leading the way. And here, Andy is leading the patrols going through the jungles trying to find the enemy. They landed on Bougainville on November 1st, 1943, and they were there for a couple of months and then left. But the stories about these dogs were truly amazing, and their stories only got bigger as the war went on. So Caesar was the very first dog to get injured. He was there for the first 3 days after landing. He would be carrying messages back and forth. And then on the third day, he was going through and he was hit with a sniper's bullet. And but he still got his message through. But what happened was the sniper had shot him, and then he kept going, and he got back to his headquarters, but he couldn't be found. And so the men went and looked for him, and they traced the blood drops, and they were able to find him. And they made this makeshift hammock for him to carry him back, the stretcher, to carry him back to the veterinarian there to get stitched up. And he had 2 wounds. He got hit in the leg, and also up in the shoulder, and you can see that clearly. But he was able to, the doctor was able to successfully remove the bullet in his leg. But the one here that is close to his heart, that was left in him. But he survived his wounds and went on to fight in Guam. And then sadly, he didn't make it home from the war. He did pass away there. I had his war dog book. His is the only war dog book, strangely enough, that was missing a few pages. So it's hard to know exactly what happened to him, how he died. But anyway, it really is an amazing story that you'll enjoy reading about. And this is Andy. Andy was an amazing patrol dog, scout patrol dog. And they said he had a jiggity step. His tail was kind of, he'd go sideways, when he'd see something, not good. And he was just this great dog that was so smart. And he actually saved his platoon one day from advancing forward. He spotted 2 machine gun nests on both sides of the trail that the men would be traveling. And so the enemy had set up so it would be a crossfire. And Andy was able to detect those on a scout. And his handler was able to throw grenades into both of the machine gun nests and take them out. And so they were able to get through safely, thank goodness. But these are just some wonderful pictures of Andy, and you can see him on the beach here with his men. And they really just took such good care of all of these dogs, and just great. You'll love these stories. And then I have a couple of stories in the book about more than mascots. And some of you might already know about the wonderful little Yorkshire Terrier named Smokey. And Bill Wynn down here in the bottom was Smokey's person. And he trained her to do all kinds of things, not only entertain the troops, but she was just this amazing little dog. She was actually found in a foxhole in New Guinea. She had been somehow abandoned, lost her way from her owner, and she was found. And so Bill took her under his wing and took care of her and trained her to do tricks. She actually became, in the bottom picture left here, she would go and visit the wounded and sick in the hospitals. And she became the very first therapy dog, and that's by Animal Planet. They've listed her as the very first therapy dog because she made so many people happy. But what she did during the war, she up in this top left-hand corner here, you can see that she actually strung communication wire through that little pipe. Look at her going into that little pipe. Through that little pipe, it was 70 feet that she had to go through and string this communication wire. And by doing so, it prevented the men from having to dig up an airstrip and exposing them and their planes to the enemy. And this was in the Philippines. And so she was able to crawl through that space. At sometimes she had to even dig her way through because it was so tight. But she made it through and was able to do that heroically. And so it was an amazing little thing that she was able to do. But on the bottom left-hand picture here, she is standing or sitting with Sinbad. Sinbad was the Coast Guard's mascot. And actually, he was much more than a mascot, but he was a naughty little dog. And his favorite thing to do was when the boat docked in a port and the men would go into town and have a beer, Sinbad would go with him and he would jump up on a stool. He would have a shot of whiskey and chase it down with the beer. And it is said that he had a girl in every port. He's just this great dog that absolutely was on the ship, that he was just adored by the men. And you can see from the pictures here, this picture of him, he's a salty little sailor, they called him in this one, which I absolutely adore. But here he is fighting the Nazis. And it is said that as long as Sinbad was on board the ship, nothing bad would really happen to the ship, that whatever would happen, the men would survive. And as you'll read in my book, that's exactly what happened. And you can also read how Sinbad's legacy lives on today, which is really quite special and phenomenal. But I just love this dog, just love this dog. And even if you go to the Coast Guard's website and in their archives, they have all these kind of pictures up on Sinbad and tell his story because they're very proud of this little dog. And in my book, it's filled with pictures of Sinbad, and his story is just absolutely delightful. So here we have the warbirds, and these were the winged heroes that served during World War II. This picture up on top is actually taken earlier than World War II. And this is how the pigeons were first used as spies in a lot of ways, thinking that they could take pictures have a camera strapped to their chests and take pictures. And that's really kind of what happened. And that was the first of using kind of these birds as spies. But of course, they couldn't travel too far because of the weight of the camera and all of that. But they were later dropped in behind enemy lines, and that was how they were used as spies in World War II. But it's really quite phenomenal what these birds did in the war. And there were over 34 birds that were honored with the Dicken Medal during World War II. And their stories are in my book. And just amazing when you hear how they first reported from the beaches of Normandy. And or they were able to save people, men that had a plane crashed in the ocean, and these birds were able to get messages back, and the men were saved thanks to that. But it's amazing how these animals got through. And even with the British had donated, and as Americans did too, donated their own birds to the cause, their own homing pigeons to the cause, just like they had to, people donated their dogs because they didn't have enough birds to be utilized without that. And so it's just really, really something special what these birds did. They would carry their messages either in a capsule, the bigger capsule on their back. That was for maps or photos or larger things than just the messages. But normally they would carry their messages, that's down here, on a leg, in a capsule on their leg. And the capsule, the message would be put into the capsule. and then the birds would be released, and then they would fly back to their home loft. And depending on how far that would be, where they had to go, you think about these birds being released in Europe and having to fly over the English Channel to get to their home loft over anywhere in England. It was quite phenomenal what these winged warriors did during the war. So they were thrown out of planes, either like the picture up here on the left, upper left, or a lot of times they were dropped by parachute behind enemy lines. This is how they were used for spies during World War II as well. They'd be dropped in a basket, and then they would have, whoever found them, they'd have enough food for a couple of days. And then hopefully somebody from the French resistance would find them. And then there would be a questionnaire in the basket, and they would be, the person who found them would fill out this questionnaire and give information on what was happening in that area, and then attach it to the bird, and then release the bird. And so the bird would then fly back and have all of this information back to its home loft, which was just amazing, just amazing. Or they would also jump out with the men. They would parachute with the men if it was a particular battle they were going to, and needed to make sure that they had, if the walkie-talkies weren't able to help them, to be able to use the birds in various capacities to get messages back. So America's most decorated and famous pigeon in World War II, and is actually the only American hero to receive the PDSA Dicken Medal, was a pigeon named G.I. Joe. And G.I. Joe was America's most highest decorated warbird. And what G.I. Joe did was truly incredible. There was a bombing mission scheduled to take place at 11:15 in the morning. And the Germans were in a town called Vivecchia, and the British soldiers were trying to take the town back. So this bombing mission was planned to eradicate the enemy so the British could move in. Well, the Germans gave up the town earlier than expected, and there was no way to get a message back to headquarters except through G.I. Joe. And this was like just at 10:40 in the morning. And so G.I. Joe, the message was strapped to him. G.I. Joe flew 20 miles in 20 minutes and stopped the planes on the tarmac. The planes were ready to take off on the tarmac. He stopped the planes on the tarmac from taking off and bombing the town that the British had just taken over. And he saved the lives of over 100 British soldiers, which was just an amazing, amazing feat. And so after the war, G.I. Joe returned to America, and then he was flown back to London. These pictures on the bottom were from his Dicken Medal ceremony. It was at the Tower of London. Over 600 people showed up to see G.I. Joe receive the Dicken Medal. And it was just an amazing, amazing day that this little bird got it. And he's really, really is America's most decorated warbird. And you can read all about his story in my book. So then we have war horses and the war mules. Honestly, there weren't a lot of horses that were utilized in World War II, especially when you think of all of the millions of horses that were used in World War I. Only 49 horses were shipped overseas at that time. If a horse was needed, they were procured over there. Of the 20,000 plus horses that were used during World War II, most of them were used by the Coast Guard to watch our coastlines, to parade up and down the coastlines. And that's what this picture up here on the upper left-hand side are the Coast Guard horses walking up and down the coastlines. And also here, these pictures on the left-hand side are Coast Guard pictures with the horses and the dog on the bottom and top. The mules were the most used, especially in the China, India, Burma conflict. Thousands of mules were used to carry equipment, supplies, ammunition. But during the Blitz of World War II, these three horses at the top are Olga, Upstart, and Regal. And these horses were the only horses that were awarded the Dicken Medal back during World War II. And they were awarded these medals because they had to control the chaos during the Blitz. And they helped move equipment, they helped move ambulances, they controlled the chaos with the people screaming and running and all of that. And so those three horses were part of the police and helped really take care of all of the chaotic things that were happening during the war in London as this Blitz took place. I gained a whole new respect for the British and a love of Winston Churchill from learning about these animals, because of what they went through during this war was something it is hard to explain, describe, and imagine, except you had to experience it. And I just really admire them all for going through it. So there's even a war cat. This is Simon the War Cat. And you're going to have to read my book to learn about Simon the War Cat, because he's the only war cat to get the Dicken Medal. But he's just this amazing little guy who became really a savior on the ship that he was on, and the Amethyst. And his story is just amazing. And he was wounded very badly when his ship was attacked, and the ship was grounded for over 100 days on the Yangtze River. Now, of course, his event took place a little bit after World War II, but he's a war cat. So I had to put him in the book because he's a war cat. And he became one of the very first, if not the first, therapy cat. And when you read his story, you'll understand why. And if you didn't have an appreciation for cats before, I think you will really, really have one after you read Simon's story. He's just this amazing cat. And he received his Dicken Medal before he died. It's just fabulous. So in learning all about these animal stories, they inspired me when I was back for Reckless's Dicken Medal. I asked Jan McLaughlin, the head of the PDSA, why doesn't America have a medal like this? Why aren't we honoring our animals the way the British have honored their animals since World War II? And I thought it was a travesty. So my nonprofit started the Animals in War and Peace Medal of Bravery. And our very first medal ceremony was given on Capitol Hill. Thanks to my friend Mary Lou Livingood, we are working to make this a congressional medal. But this ceremony was very, very special. And one of my board members and dear friend, Karen Storms, was also there during the ceremony to help tell the stories of these amazing animals that were received this medal. And we started off, we honored 8 animals, and this is going to be a yearly award. We hope. Sadly, because of the COVID virus, we can't do it in 2020, so it'll be sometime in 2021. But we honored 8 animals, starting with Sergeant Reckless. Of course, she was number 1. That's just because I had some pull. But we had Cherami, the pigeon from World War I. We had Chips from World War II. We also had G.I. Joe from World War II. Stormy from Vietnam, Luca from Afghanistan and Iraq. And then we had 2 dogs that one is currently still working with the New York City Fire Department named Buka. And then a multi-purpose canine from the Marine Corps that just retired last year named Bass. And if you go to waranimals.com, you can see pictures of our incredible ceremony, and you can see pictures of you can actually see the whole ceremony itself. This picture down here on the bottom is little Buka wearing his Medal of Bravery, which I think is just so priceless, especially when you hear this dog's story, how he was rescued from a dogfighting ring to become the New York City Fire Department's greatest arson detection dog that they have. But the medal itself, we're very, very proud of. It was designed by Cleve and Company in England. They are the same people that make the PDSA Dicken Medal. And we are just very, very excited about this medal. And it was just a great, great day of celebration for these wonderful winged and 4-legged heroes. And those medals will all go on display in our International War Animals Museum that we are working on right now to put together. We are hoping that this museum will be a place for people to come and learn history through the eyes of the animals. There won't be anything like it. Not only will you see artifacts and learn their stories, we'll have audio visuals of what it's like for a dog to run through the jungles of Bougainville with a message on its back, or what it was like for a bird to fly through the battlefields of Normandy to try to get its message back. And it really should be a very, very unique museum, and we're very, very excited about it. If you go to, again, waranimals.com, you can see all about the museum and learn what we have to do, and hopefully join us in our efforts to make sure this happens. I know kids will really enjoy learning history this way, and I think a few adults will too. I just know what I did with this. So these are some of my contacts that you can get to me. I would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments, you can go on waranimals.com and reach out that way. We have Facebook pages for Sergeant Reckless and the Animals in War and Peace. We'd love to have you join us on that. That's my email for waranimals@yahoo.com. I would love to hear from you guys, any questions you might have, or if somebody wants to do a story for school, any kids want to do a story on these animals, they can email me and I'd be happy to help send pictures or answer questions. We've had quite a few kids do this, and they've done very, very well with their stories. So I really hope you guys had a good time learning about these wonderful stories on these four-legged and winged heroes in my book on war animals, The Unsung Heroes of World War II. These animals have changed my life in ways that I never, ever could have imagined, and they still are. It's just finding new ways to get people to understand these stories and learn about these moments in history that are so important today. And I just want to thank you so much for joining me. And please check out my other podcasts that I'll be putting up. I'll have one up on Sergeant Reckless. I'm doing Chips next. And then I will be doing podcasts, shorter podcasts on some of the other wonderful animals in my book. And then also other animals that are not in my book that have served our country throughout history, throughout time. And I think you'll enjoy those stories for well. So anyway, thank you so much. God bless. And I look forward to talking with you soon.